Zoom is you have to look at yourself.
Today is Thursday, December 21st, 2023. And we're discussing Night Angels. I blurred my background, but you know what?
Blurry.
By Weina Dai Randel, who spoke at Macomb a couple weeks ago. So I thought she was very interesting when she spoke, and I'm going to put the link to the YouTube because she asked me to keep it private because she's speaking at other places. But if you haven't seen her, there she is. And there's Night Angels right here. And she's married to a Jewish man. And she came to the States when she was 24. And I thought her English was very, very
good.
good.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that she writes in English.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Has anyone, oh, excuse me, has anyone read any of her other books? Because they looked interesting.
I haven't yet, but they do look interesting.
I
She's
think I read The Last Rose of Shanghai.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Did you like it?
I think I did. I have to
Okay.
look it up to see it. You know, I
Yeah.
read so many books.
Yeah.
It's
So
Well, she said her next book was going to be a prior period in Shanghai.
Yeah.
And that should be interesting because I'm right now reading The Last Jews of Shanghai, which is it's nonfiction, but it's really interesting. It's about two major wealthy Jewish families and how they made their money and, you know.
okay, so I just wrote a couple things about The Last Rose of Shanghai.
Yeah.
I said I really enjoyed this book. The action and the interplay drew you in and you wanted to know about the story. I said the story was sad in many ways, but had an interesting twist at the end. I thought the author's prose was lovely, and they quoted one of my favorite sayings all the time, which was "Men make plans and God laughs."
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That is a good quote.
Yeah.
So Weina Dai Randel is the Wall Street Journal best-selling award-winning author of 4 novels: Night Angels, The Last Rose of Shanghai, The Moon in the Palace, and The Empress of Bright Moon, a historical duology about Wu Zetian, China's only female emperor. Wang is the winner of, I'm sorry, it's Weina. Weina is the winner of the RWA, RITA National Jewish Book Award. She got a lot of awards. And she is also the recipient of the Mass Cultural Council's Art Grant in 2023. Her novels have been translated into 13 languages, including Hebrew. The other thing that I thought that I would show you, and now come up here.
Do we know how old she is now?
I think she's in her,
I think she said she was 43.
yeah, I was going to say she's in her 40s.
Oh, okay.
Now,
Thank you.
this is what the doctor looked like. Oh, Feng Shan. You see him with a cigarette. Remember, he was always smoking cigars. He was born in 1901. And so, and she does base this novel on him, but it's a fictional account, which she says straight up. That Grace, you know, he had a second wife, but Grace wasn't her name. And I'll read you the thing that Evie sent about what really happened in a second after we discuss a little bit. I think she did a lot of research.
Tremendous.
And the thing that hit me is that and Lola is made up and, you know, so on. And the Chinese embassy being blown up is made up. But
I wondered if that was real. Yeah.
not. But how the Jews of Vienna you know, they had to put a star on, they lost their jobs, they lost their money, they lost their apartments, all their wealth had to go. When do you leave? Why didn't they leave?
Uh, Vanessa,
Go ahead.
I knew somebody who went to Shanghai
Yeah.
Yeah.
in the late 30s
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and lived there until she came to the United States.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
was taken there as a child.
Yeah. Paula.
I think that, like people from many other countries in Europe, they believed in the national, that they were national citizens of their country before they were Jews, and that they were protected by their individual countries and historically the humanitarian action of those countries. And then they were systematically just stripped of everything.
Mhm.
I think by the time they figured it out, it was too late to go
The same thing happened with the people in Berlin,
in Berlin.
Yeah.
Jews in Berlin, the same thing.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
Yeah.
things happening around us now. Are we waiting too long?
Well, unfortunately, that's what I've been asking myself, that, when does the time, and we've had not serious discussions, but we've had discussions, around the table about where would we go and, what's
Yeah.
happening. And, well, yeah, so,
Yeah.
Sandy.
I wanted to ask Sue Wellick if she was referring to Harriet when she said she knew somebody.
No, the woman I knew, whose name is Elsa.
Oh, because we had a member from Solel who
Oh,
was
no. This
the
is
one.
somebody. When I lived in Aurora, she was a member of our congregation.
Well, we had this wonderful woman who was a member of Solel, and the reason I met her and went to her house and was invited to a birthday party for her was because she was the woman who gave the money very quietly for Dove Taylor to come back every year and do his weekend. She supported that. She paid for everything, all the
Interesting.
expenses.
Merle, what were you saying?
I don't think it was the same woman that Susan knew. Her name was Ilsa, but she worked in Highland Park at the thrift shop at Ort for many years, or Hadassah House for many
Yeah.
years before she passed away. And she talked about it all the time.
Yeah.
She was a child. It was such an awful experience for her. She was so happy to finally get to the United States.
Right.
Yeah.
I had two neighbors who also were in Shanghai.
Yeah.
One had it not so bad because her father was a doctor, so she lived in the international area, but the other lived in it had to be like a slum,
It was
but they were
squalid.
alive.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, when they were describing Shanghai and these Jews were standing in line and wanting to go there, I mean, it didn't sound like paradise. It sounded like a squalor. Give it to this bigger story to be sure. Elaine, thank you. Is there a specific story to read in Candle Feather, etc.? Our next book is January's Ashton Hall.
Oh, we switched.
We did because
Candle
no.
Feather's so new. Yeah.
Right. Lauren Belfer
could get it
is
in.
going to be with us that night.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. But I will, that's a good question for whenever I put that. Oh, here comes Evie. I felt very sympathetic to Grace with the language. She could only speak English. When people looked at her, they expected that she could speak Chinese. She didn't speak German. It must have been very, very, very hard for her there. We had a member at Lakeside, and she had two girls adopted from China, and they went back to China to, I think, see where they were adopted from. And there's two things the mom said to me. She said, one, everyone expected her girls to be able to speak Chinese, and they don't. And two, she said, in America, like when I get on a bus or, I'm in a big crowd, my kids stick out because, especially on the North Shore, they're Asian. She goes, but here they just blended into the crowd. And so, I thought that was interesting. But Grace, who was really, half Asian and half American, why do you think she had such an affinity to Lola? Because Lola was half Jewish and half Christian. Sue.
Well, I think that she needed a friend.
Yeah.
She was starved for company.
Yeah.
And as it became more and more obvious as you went on with the story, her husband was so into his career.
Yeah.
Into impressing the people that he needed to impress for himself, that he wasn't always there for her. And I think she was desperate for company. And she found a sympathetic character in.
Although,
I'm sorry.
Brenda then Lynn.
Also, I think age-wise, they were a little closer. There was a pretty big age difference between her and her husband. And they just seemed, she was also Grace was also pretty shy, at least in the beginning. And Lola was not. So, Lola, she felt comfortable around Lola. Lola brought her out of her shell, so to speak.
Yeah. Lynn.
I think they really click together. And that it happens with some people, you get along right away with someone, but others, I was really surprised because he was so friendly with Wiley, the American, that she didn't really befriend the wife. I think she said something about that she was off doing other things, but still, somebody else who spoke English, you would have thought she would have like made an effort to really go after that person.
Although maybe Wiley's the wife, because she was half Asian, didn't, those
that's
those
true.
State
That's
Department
true.
guys were very buttoned up. And
Yeah.
I agree with her that Sue, that you said you talked about the husband, but that was, was the
1930s.
Yeah,
Or
1930s. And
yeah.
that, I don't want to say all men were like that, but all men were like that.
Mhm.
And Merle.
I thought the two of them really suffered from their shyness.
Yeah.
And that when Lola first met Grace, why didn't she say, we can't sit on this bench?
Right.
That was such an awful thing that happened to both of them.
Yeah.
If she just had the courage to say, I'm so sorry, we can't sit on this bench. I know you don't read German, but this is what it says.
Yeah.
I felt like they were really kindred spirits, and that drew them together. They were so shy, some of them.
So
yeah, I also didn't understand why she didn't just say, hey, we're not allowed to sit here.
Yeah.
We're going to get in trouble.
I don't know if that's a European thing, but had they been reversed, Americans would have said straight up, hey, I don't think we can sit here. And so I'm not sure. I mean, obviously it lended itself to the story and they got in trouble. And that's they brought in Eichmann. And I'm going to, Evie, I'm going to read the article you sent me, because that was also, the whole meeting of Eichmann was fictional. Although I thought his description as oily, weaselly, evil was spot on. Spot on.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, he was just terrible. Did somebody else? Okay. I also thought the way at the end, when she trips and has, a miscarriage, and then they give her a hysterectomy, and that was all fictional, and we'll read about that in a minute. But and I know they did stuff like that to women in the 30s and didn't ask them, and she had no idea it was going on, and then she became addicted. to painkillers, but that seemed pretty, that it just seemed, you know, what an ending is all I can say.
Well, she didn't trip, she was pushed.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
according to
still,
the story.
it was a fall.
Right.
Still, if every woman that ever fell down a flight of stairs miscarried, we would have women throwing themselves down the stairs as
Yeah.
a cheap way of terminating a pregnancy left and right. A fetus
Absolutely.
that is inside a womb is actually incredibly well protected from
Right.
something like falling down the stairs.
Right. And that's what I thought. Sue, go ahead.
I forgot what I was going to say.
Okay, we'll come back to you.
That's my age.
Abby, of course, Julian can join. Wait. Go ahead. Anyway, he can join. Anyone can join.
Okay, I didn't know if it was gender.
No, we're good. Everybody. Yeah, Merle.
And I thought it was so ironic that Lola was telling Grace how wonderful Vienna was and that
Yeah.
the streets are paved with culture here, whereas in other
Mhm.
places they're paved with concrete. And then telling her about all the beautiful buildings and the castles and architecture that went back to the Holy Roman Empire, when what was going on in Vienna was just awful. And yet she was trying to make Grace feel better about being in Vienna.
I
So-
do think that Weina painted a beautiful picture of Vienna. And it does, you know, it makes you want to see it. And we read another book, The Amber Hair. Do you remember that?
Mm.
And it was about
Yeah.
What are those things
Those-
called that the
Netskis. They're called
Netskis?
Yeah,
Netskis.
that's they're called. Netskis.
Right. And this family had had all of this, and you want to see it. It sounds, beautiful, but again, rotten from the core. And that it it fell so quickly and everything followed suit so quickly is just, frightening. Evie, then Susan.
Yeah, I really loved the descriptions. If I can say this without breaking up, my father was picked up the morning after Kristallnacht and put in Dachau. So I don't know. I mean, I visited in 67, 68, and it gave me an appreciation because I had nobody to really talk to, how beautiful it was. And until one of our sons went to Vienna probably about 25 years ago. God, yeah. And talked about, he thought it was the most beautiful city he had ever seen. So for me to see the descriptions, from an objective point of view, I mean, that kind of drew me into the story a lot more. So I really liked the descriptions. My father, of course, never had any desire to return, but just hearing him talk about certain places and being able to see them described. I mean, he was visually impaired, so I didn't get, the descriptions. So to me, that was a real strong part of the story
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. And obviously she did a lot of research. Susan.
Yeah, I agree with you, Evie, also. I've been to Vienna twice and stayed at the Soccer Hotel. So when they talked about that, and it was, well, of course, I was there, oh my gosh, in the 80s, I guess it was. And no, late 70s. And anyway, it was beautiful. And we went to Schönbrunn Palace and, all the beautiful places that she was describing in this book. It really took me back and, gave me a really warm feeling.
Yeah, I mean, these descriptions are beautiful. Paula.
I think that her command of language, being a non-native speaker, and these descriptions and how it evokes such emotion in all of us is quite remarkable. And so there's flaws in the plot, obviously, and flaws in the character development, but her mastery of language and the way she thinks in English, I think is extraordinary. She's really brilliant.
And I was shocked as you started getting into the book and then you start Googling. But I mean, he was a real person and he did, save thousands of Jews, and that this is the first time I had heard of him. And I'm going to again get to Evie's in a minute, and I think I've shared this with you before, but I went to Vienna in 1980. Arthur and I were coming home from Israel, and we get to Vienna. We weren't there long, and I said, "I have to have a hot dog here." And he was like, "Why?" I said, "I have to have a hot dog here." And so we had a terrible hot dog that I'm sure was full of pork.
Oh,
And 5 years later, when he came to Chicago, he goes, "Did you find a hot dog in Vienna because of Vienna hot dog?"
yeah.
Vanessa, you should have had apple strudel because that was
Yeah.
what was really good
Yeah.
there.
Right.
Yeah.
We
I
did.
have,
It's funny.
We did have apple strudel, and it was,
Good.
I still remember it. That was delicious.
Delicious.
But every once in a while, he brings up the whole Vienna hot dog thing.
I have a question. What
Yes.
came first, the Sacher Hotel or Sacher Tort?
Mm,
The
I
Sacher
have
Tort
no
is-
idea.
Yeah.
No
I
idea.
think the hotel.
The
and I
hotel.
think the
Probably.
And
tort
then the
was
tort, yeah, because the
It
tort
was
is
the bakery.
very,
Yeah.
pioneered at
delicious.
the hotel, kind of like Parker House Rolls
Uh-huh.
from the Omni Parker Hotel.
Right.
Thank you. Okay, Merle.
I was there in 1966 on the way to a language study tour in Russia. So we had to stop over just for like one night, I think, in Vienna. And I woke up the next morning and it smelled like delicious, freshly baked bread.
Oh, yeah.
And everything was served mitschlag. All the desserts were fabulous.
Yeah.
And I just remember walking away and thinking, could this have been a terrible place once? Because it was so beautiful then. And that smell of fresh bread, the fact that I can still remember it, it was a fantastic place.
It's really a mixed bag. And now, of course, when you go to Europe or anywhere there, it's 2, 3 generations, the people who participated in the atrocities are all dead or dying, and it's a whole new generations. Sue?
So when they in the book, when she talks about taking the little girl, Eva, to the kinder transport
Oh, yeah.
to put her on the train,
Mm-hmm.
it made me remember 6 years ago when I was in Berlin. There's a huge, for anybody who may have seen it also, a big display of the kinder transport.
Yeah.
And a memorial, memorializing it. And it's amazing what those parents had to do to save their children.
Yeah.
And
It
I
is
thought it was so interesting in the book how
Yeah.
at the very end,
right.
Grace is not Grace, but
Right.
Eva shows up at the very end.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was really interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that was good. Andy.
The beginning of the book, I think, is a credit to the author and the entire book. But in the beginning of the book, I found the stripping of the rights and reading that almost more horrible than some of the atrocities we've read about the Holocaust itself, that I almost could not continue to read it because I think it rather struck home with the anti-Semitism here.
Yeah.
But
I
that
think, yeah.
but the way she wrote it was very, very, like everyone said, the language were so powerful that
Yeah.
you could feel those emotions, which I usually don't feel. I've read a lot of Holocaust books, but this one really, really touched me. It was so personal with Lola, with the consulate's friend.
Right. I also think that because we know what happens at the end of the story, it makes the beginning more frightening. Because if you do look at, I mean, it's not happening here in the United States, and You know, our rights are not being taken away. But we know what happened, you know, and we know about Dachau, and we know about, you know, these concentration camps. So the run up just makes it even more frightening, because you think, why? I can think, leave, leave, leave. And they were rich and they had resources, you know, Mr. Rosenberg, and we're going to read about that in a second. Sandy?
You are talking about, we know, you know, this and that about the Holocaust, but just tonight, it was around 5 o'clock, I believe I was listening to News Nation, and they were giving statistics that 50% of the kids in schools don't even know about the Holocaust. And some of them that do know, they say, oh, the Holocaust, isn't that something the Jews did? And they are so ignorant, the young people in this country, about the Holocaust. They're worse than deniers. They're just ignorant. And maybe their teachers are even ignorant. And so this whole thing about anti-Semitism has to show us now that the whole education system has to change in this country, or Jews will never feel respected for what our grandparents went through. It was, these statistics were sickening. I was
Right.
having dinner
I mean,
then
I would,
watching it.
right. I would say that, you know, how ignorant the people of America are goes over many, many, many subjects. And we are lucky to live in Illinois because we have a law that says you have to teach the Holocaust. Now, they don't say how you have to do it, and there are other states that have laws that say you have to teach the Holocaust. I think Illinois might have been one of the first. I should really look that up. And that happened in the, you know, I'm going to say in the 80s, 90s. And, you know, for a long time, we didn't talk about the Holocaust. People weren't comfortable about talking about it. And then as I think some watershed events, in my opinion, there was a television show on in the 70s called Shoah. And James Woods, Meryl Streep might have been in it. It had a lot of very young actors, and it told a Holocaust story, and it was a little sanitized. But once that program came out, and I remember because I was at the University of Michigan, and, you know, we didn't have TVs in our dorm room, so we had to go down to the, you know, the lobby or whatever that was called. And we were all watching it because there was, like, you know, thousands of Jews there. And I remember sitting next to someone whose parents were Holocaust survivors, and it was watershed. And then people, you know, started talking about it, and, you know, certainly I've been dedicated to having a Holocaust survivor every year before Yom HaShoah. This year it'll be on May 5th at 6:30. Please come. So I think that, you know, we have to tell our story. And sometimes, certainly as an educator, I feel that that's my responsibility. Evie.
Yeah,
And
having gone to Jewish
Okay.
day school and having that family history, it was never, ever, ever talked about. And I, didn't have anybody to talk about it. And I think we were already married when all of a sudden there was this big thing about Holocaust Memorial Day. I resented it. I couldn't stand it. All of a sudden became like this big hoopla that everybody bannered around. And I remember even back in our days at Solel, when we were involved then, and it was a big thing with the candles, and I remember working on the banners and so forth. But I had such a hard time with it until I was a little bit more. It was like, not, I don't want to say a celebration, but like a to do, and to me it was a very personal thing that I couldn't talk to anybody about, and almost was embarrassed or ashamed or whatever. So emotionally, we were talking about in your short story group about how the emotional trauma that we have for different things. But I mean, I have certainly, accepted it now. And as a matter of fact, when the museum first opened, our son
in
David,
Skokie.
no, in Washington, our son David was there on some kind of a field trip, and he gave a Devar Torah at Friday night services about his experiences going there. And then I became a little bit more, more accustomed to it and comfortable. But at first, so my point is, I think you needed a certain amount of spacing to be away from it, to be able to talk about it in some kind of a rational, not just rational, because I don't think it's ever going to be rational, but to be able to discuss it and become more familiar with even the terminology, know what to say, or so I can understand, the necessity for the gap in time.
Yeah, I
But you're
absolutely.
all talking about Jews and the Holocaust. I'm talking about non-Jews in the United States, that 50% of them have never heard about it.
Right.
And
So
those that have.
But I was listening to
Go
a
ahead, Lynn.
program.
Yeah.
I was listening to a program. I don't know if it was on NPR or something else I read, and they were talking about the Holocaust education and about so many people in this country who don't know a Jewish person, and the only thing they know about us is the Holocaust. And so that's one reason this anti-Semitism has gotten so big, is because people don't realize what Jews bring to the world besides the Holocaust. So even the people who teach about the Holocaust don't know much about what it means to be Jewish, or what's behind being Jewish, or what we're all about. So, I mean, that was really dramatic for me to realize that, because I hadn't really ever thought about it that way. But some of these people
and Lynn, you're
rural towns, they have no idea.
You're 100% right. And so many people, like, the only vision they have of a Jew is an old man with a long white beard and a hat.
Right.
And they think that's what everyone looks like, and that we're all the same. And people who, they look at you, they say, well, you don't look like a Jew. And
exactly. But back to the book, I think one of the reasons we felt so strongly emotionally about what was happening to these people is the way she developed these characters. You really feel close to the characters, and you get to know the people that they're friends with and their association that they have. And so because of that, it really hits us more strongly, because you feel like you know these people. And you feel like what they're going through is, you're going through what they're going through.
Right. And when she describes Mr. Rosenberg, and then we see he's in a tattered.
And Lola.
Yeah.
Lola and Lola's mother getting hit by, everything. You've already connected with all these characters.
Yeah.
And that's how she draws you in to really feel the emotions of it all.
Right. Paula.
I think she did such an excellent job of describing the society as being so special in Vienna, and the propriety of the diplomats and their relationships with one another. And then when she juxtaposed that with the dehumanization of the people who were part of the society, your heart gets torn away when you read that.
Right.
Yeah. I also had never thought about, so her Lola's classification was Mischling, and that's somebody who's half Jewish or a quarter. I think maybe down to an eighth. And I know after those laws were enforced that Jews couldn't go to Christian hospitals, but I never thought about what would happen if a Mischling wanted to go to a Christian hospital, a Jewish hospital. Like, she had to go to someone who would just sew her up in his living room. I had never thought about that. So those racial laws, which I believe to a certain extent were based upon Jim Crow laws that we had here, because I think the Nazis looked at that. But and sometimes though the Jim Crow laws went even farther, and it's all of that is horrible. Marilyn.
Yeah, I found the book very, very informative, but it was also very disturbing as a Jewish mother to read what these people went through and the degradation that they had to live with.
Yeah.
And as much as I enjoyed the book, it also was very disturbing to read because it brought things to the forefront that we probably haven't thought about for quite a while. And all that stuff about Eichmann, we all know that he was just, well, there's no word to describe him, okay? And she did a really good job on describing him and his facial characteristics and his smears and all that. So it was disturbing to read, but I'm glad that I read it.
Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of Holocaust study, and I try not, and I know the last two books were Holocausty, but the next one, and I'll tell you about it at the end, is set in England. So there, you know, it runs the gamut, and as we come to the end of the lives of Holocaust survivors, I think, you know, there's going to be more books. There's going to be, so this book is from the Jewish Book Council, and so many books that they sponsor are about the Holocaust, you know, novels, history, but so on and so forth. So it's hard. I picked 8 books, and it was hard not to pick at least one Holocaust book. Now, though, I want to share with you, Abby sent me this morning, and this, let me just put this here. So Abby, how did you find this?
Full disclosure, I wasn't sure I would have time to finish the book, so I was looking for a summary. And I found this. So then I did go ahead and I did finish it about maybe 20 minutes before
We started. Good job.
That's how I found it.
So the daughter, she says the novel distorts her father's World War II rescue of the Jews. Oh, and Elaine said there'll be new books about the new massacre on October 7th.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
Don't
So
you have to take anything that's written in something called the China Daily with a grain of salt, though?
here's the thing. She says it's fiction.
Right, it's fiction.
And so Weina Dai Randel, a Chinese native, blah, 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 blah. But it says it's based on the true story. He did save all these Jews. And, you know, they say apparently she wants it both ways. And I quickly read this, but so his then wife Grace helped convince my father's character Feng Shun to save the Jews. In fact, he sent Grace and my brother Monto away for their safety to Grace's home of Brooklyn shortly after the Anschluss, the Union of Austria and Nazi Germany in 1938. So they weren't even there. And in the book, he's initially reluctant, although again, you know, that has to do with the Chinese ambassador Chen, but she says that Chen wasn't even there yet. And in the book, Feng Shun has to be told what Dachau concentration camp is and does not know Sigmund Freud is a Jew. Okay, everybody knew that. And and what befalls his friend Rosenberg at the hands of the Nazis. So she said that her father knew what was going on. He urged his Jewish friends to leave, rescue the real Rosenberg after a tense face-off with the Gestapo on Kristallnacht. And listen, he saved people. Kristallnacht, that happened.
Yeah.
So in the book, Feng Shun has several run-ins with cartoonishly villainous Adolf Eichmann. I think he was as villainous as she said. The first in May 1938, when he tries to get Grace released from detention at Gestapo headquarters. She has been arrested for sitting at the park bench. None of this is based on, you know, on fact. Her father never met Eichmann. Oh, look, you know, it's fiction. You have to have a story there.
Right, right.
I'm gonna copy this so that if anybody wants to read this.
Yeah.
Well, I think I think if anything, it would make the reader more interested in the history,
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
you know, and in no way was her father's reputation maligned. If anything,
Right.
he's
Right.
more of a hero in our eyes.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. So, I'm not sure.
I say,
You know,
say fooey. I call BS.
there's the article. You can click on it and then read it at your leisure.
There's also, I think one of the Israeli newspapers also wrote a similar review of this, that it was historically not accurate. Well, it's called historical fiction for a reason.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I know because we met her and I interviewed her that I feel more sympathetic, but
Mhm.
it's not like
Mhm.
she was saying, she said it was fiction.
Right.
And she did bring this. I mean, he's a hero. And she brought him to life because before him, nobody had ever heard of him.
Right.
So, it is interesting though that Monto wasn't there and Sandy and then Andy.
I'd heard of him before. I don't remember where I read about him. But I was most impressed with was his thinking and reasoning, where, he recognized there's a problem here, and the drive to do something about it kind of came about, but then the thinking was that this is the right thing to do, and hey, here's a way to do it, and what was he going to do? And then he just took it on. But I was very much impressed with the thinking behind it, and his wife supported him in doing the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Andy.
I was just going to add to what Sandy said, that if he himself did not take all of these actions, many like-minded people like him risk their job, risk their lives, risk their families' lives, risk their livelihood for many Jews to somehow get to Shanghai, of all places, and was one of the few places, sadly, where Jews would be tolerated.
I wouldn't say tolerated, I would say accepted.
Accepted.
Because they couldn't get in anywhere else.
Right.
The other thing that I notice a similarity to is if you remember Schindler's List. And again, it's the movie, it's historical fiction, but was based on a book. At the end, Schindler was obsessed with saving Jews, putting more people on the list, and also Raoul Wallenberg. They become, those heroes became obsessed because I think they knew what was going to happen if they didn't save the Jews. And so it's really, it's an obsession. And I mean, a good one, Paula.
And as she developed his obsession and you could see how it was consuming him, you could see the destruction of the marriage going on.
Yeah.
And those very same traits of character that helped, the Jews destroyed their relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. These people become single-minded and focused and can't really focus on anything else. And it's for the good of humanity. And so it's hard to argue with. How could Grace argue with that? How could she compete with saving somebody's life?
Somewhere in the book, didn't she say that there were Jews in Shanghai earlier in the 30s before, Hitler started taking over everything, that there were Jews who were prospering in Shanghai?
There were.
I mean, I'd have to look it up, but
no, there were.
I think that's true. I think that's true that there were Jews there. But by the time they got getting the Jews out of Vienna, they were really living in squalor. All of
Yeah.
these refugees when they got there.
Yeah, it was squalor when they got
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
And it's hard to, and listen, it was a world war, it was the end of the Depression in the United States. It's not like, people in other parts of the world, were living so high on the horse. Although the Nazis in Vienna, some of those parties she described, and the food and the drink, and then Lola's family has nothing to eat. And
Yeah.
it's that juxtaposition I thought was also, I don't know if beautiful is the word, but it was
Well done.
really, yeah,
Very-
well done.
And the women wore beautiful gowns, all kind of gorgeous jewelry. And I believe that is really true, that, those people who were part of the Nazi party, they really, they had everything because they took it away
Yeah.
from all the Jews,
Right.
whatever.
But even when Grace went to the park with Lola the first time, in the 30s, or listen, I remember into the beginning of the 60s, my mom, she was wearing gloves. My mom used to dress my sister and I up with gloves and patent leather shoes when we came in to see The Sound of Music in Chicago, because the movies didn't come to Crystal Lake. I mean, the way people dress then is not, is certainly not the way they dress now.
In the 40s, I was dressed like that too, with the gloves and patent leather shoes for Passover. I got pictures.
Or going on an airplane.
And
Yeah,
Girl
yeah,
Scouts,
on
Girl
the
Scouts, we
airplane.
had gloves. Girl Scouts, we had like white gloves too.
Yeah.
I remember that.
And
Yeah.
I remember wearing gloves when I got married.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really?
Do you take the glove off to put the wedding ring on then?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. but we did. We wore. I had actually long glove. I had a short sleeve dress and long gloves.
Do you have a picture, Brenda?
Yeah. I mean,
All right, you got to find one and send it to me.
Okay,
we
I
want
will.
to see the long gloves.
I
Yeah.
stood up for a wedding. I went to a wedding and I was dressed with a gorgeous pink long skirt with the top and long white gloves up my arm.
Yes.
And that had to be like 1966.
Yes.
Mhm.
And I got married in 64. Yeah.
Okay,
So
there we go. Jesse, did you want to say something?
I got married in 1960. This is all very foreign to me.
Oh, really?
Gloves at my wedding, and I don't remember my mother dressing me up with, I had to wear patent leather Mary Janes, with my little white anklet socks.
Right.
Last when I was little, but not.
Yeah.
But gloves
going
were a
to
major accessory.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you remember going to a milliner? We used to have
Oh, my
a
grandmother.
millinery.
My grandmother was a milliner,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah.
I used to go there and watch her make hats.
Yeah.
I
There used to be a
remember that.
milliner in Highland Park right next to the theater.
I
Oh.
remember that my
Yes,
mother
there was.
gave
Central
me.
Street.
Yeah.
And I remember, and I was telling somebody just the other day when I got married in the 70s, I had a big hat and I went downtown. There was this place on State Street upstairs, and I bought the hat forms and I bought all the pieces and I made them all hats with daisies and lace and stuff and sewed it on. And you could go to this millinery supply store on State Street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, traditional Jewish women still need hats for sure. So there's still some milliners who are in business.
Even if they wear a shadel?
Some people do, yes.
Yes.
I do. I do.
But how people cover their head is, by custom, by groups. It's, that could be a whole book in itself.
Yeah.
Abby.
I'm just a little confused because I have a very good friend who was raised or lived in the I guess it's the Russian Shanghai ghetto, but it was a totally different lifestyle. She lived a very high level life. almost fancy, almost her mother had almost the attire that we're describing. So I don't know how they are different. I mean, she was put in they were in there, they were I don't know if Julian can hear where Marina was from. And I just spoke with her the other day talking about this book. She lives in Boston, and I thought she might, know this author because
Yeah.
it's quite a tight community. And she said she knew the name of, she didn't know the author, but she knew of the consulate's name. But I just never really found out what the difference was between the two ghettos. And I think we read a book about that too, about the kings of something or other.
Yeah, I don't know that much about it. Excuse me, I do know that there are people in Chicago who were there, and they have very different stories, as you can imagine. And there was an exhibit at the Holocaust Museum in Skokie, I think after COVID. So
my
fairly-
one neighbor who lived quite well in Shanghai, her father was a physician.
Oh,
So she, like I said, she lived in what they called the international area, and it was, it was much nicer than
but what year did she get there?
it had to be somewhere in the 30s.
Yeah.
But this book I'm reading right now, there were very wealthy Jews in Shanghai. One of the family's names was Sassoon. I don't know
Oh
if
yeah, we had Joseph Sassoon at the beginning of the year talk about the
Sassoon
book.
and
Yeah.
the Kaduris.
Yeah.
And the Sassoons made their money, a lot of their money. It's embarrassing. It's not so nice. Trading in opium.
Right.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
When I interviewed him, I let him go. I didn't ask him about the opium trade, but that is how they made a lot of their
they
money.
made a lot of money.
A lot of money. And but I think there's a difference between these old time wealth and these refugees who came from Vienna and with no money. So
absolutely, yeah.
Well, they made the comment. They made the comment that the wealthy Jews that were already there wanted them to start paying to come in, and they didn't want these
exactly.
riffraff. They didn't understand that they had been
Yeah.
just like them.
Right.
Yeah, because the Kaduris and the Sassoons were originally Iraqi, weren't they, involved in the spice trade?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the opium trade, and they were wealthy from the get-go.
Yes.
And these refugees were poor from the get-go.
Yeah.
I put in the chat, that is the link to my interview with Weina Dai Randel, if you didn't see it. She was just, very sweet and, told us a little bit about her life. And it's the other thing I keep thinking about is that Grace couldn't speak any of these languages. Yet Weina Dai Randel she speaks English, and I think she said she spoke maybe another language. And so it's interesting what she put into the characters. And
Growing up in the States, I think learning languages is a lot more difficult than when when we hear so many immigrants who are able to pick up the language so well. And I remember my father saying to me, I don't understand, the children in France speak French so well at 3 years old. Why are you struggling with whatever? I mean, and I just think borders are close. Well, I think they're just used to learning more languages. And
well, I think that certainly in Europe and frankly all over the world is that you need these languages to get ahead in life. For instance, in Israel, most everybody speaks English, but textbooks, medical books are all in English. So if you don't speak English well, you're at a great disadvantage. And I would imagine that's the same thing in many other countries. And I also think, like in Germany, when an hour away they speak French, and you could go over there and practice your French. It's different than here, where we although there's plenty of places here that you could practice your Spanish, and practice other languages. But there's not that immediacy that I need this to survive.
Mhm.
And because here in the States, we have Spanish TV stations and radio stations. In Israel, there's Russian TV station, Russian newspapers, Russian everything. You don't really need to learn Hebrew.
Mm.
And some of the Russians who, made Aliyah did not learn Hebrew. So, it's interesting how different cultural groups decide they're going to take on the language, they're not going to take on the language. So,
Vanessa,
yeah.
I took French all through high school, all through college, and I could translate beautifully. I was just great at translating. I couldn't speak French. We never spoke French, and we didn't have the labs. But then we went to Israel in 58. And in 58, there had just been, I don't know if it was the Suez thing with Egypt.
56 was the Suez thing.
Okay. So where we were placed, we were given a place. They wanted us to stay in Israel. We had paid our own way to go over there. We were just out of college, and we had just gotten married. This was our honeymoon. And we asked where we could stay, and the Jewish agency wanted us to stay and make Aliyah, which we hadn't done. We had come on our own, but they placed us in a camp, and everyone was Egyptian. All our neighbors were Egyptian.
Oh, yeah, because they were probably thrown out.
And this was where Bar Ilan University is today. It was all sand. It was all sand. The university wasn't built yet.
Right.
And believe me, the only way I could talk to any one of my neighbors was the French that I remembered. They
that's
spoke
funny.
French. The educated Egyptian Jews spoke French because I didn't know Arabic. They didn't know English. It was really funny.
Yeah. But you all had to learn Hebrew. Our hour is almost up. Next month is Ashton Hall by Lauren Belfer. I will send it to you tomorrow morning. I'm just finishing it. It's not, it has some Jewish themes, but it's a good story. And we're going to meet with her on the Thursday. She'll be here with us. So
it's a really good story. I thought it was a really entrancing book.
Yeah.
I would say it's not, like the Jewish parts that are in there are kind of like, oh, by the way,
icing.
not central.
Right. But there is a lot of faith-based discussion, and there's a lot to discuss. It'll be interesting to see what I haven't finished it yet, Elaine, but I'm almost done, and there's just a lot going on, and I think you'll really like it. I think she's a good writer. I loved we read After the Fire, and that was it was about a manuscript, and it was it was again dual times. This time is one time period. They're visiting another, they're researching another time period, but it's not going back and forth. But she had a for After the Fire, because they were looking for something from, was it Beethoven, Mozart? She had a playlist. So I'm going to ask her why she doesn't have a playlist for this. That's my first question. And so, be thinking of a question you want to ask her. And I just look forward to seeing everybody. Things are dialing down at Macomb. We're always there for Shabbat and Torah study. And if you need anything, let me know. I'm trying to think if there's anything else coming up.
Excuse me, is there a date for the January group?
There is.
Oh.
You're so demanding. Let's see if I wrote it down.
Who did you say the author is again, Vanessa?
Lauren Belfer. It's on Thursday, January 25th.
Thank you.
25th?
Yeah.
25, okay.
Oh, no. Okay.
So that was originally our March book, so we've changed it around.
I changed it because I had her booked and I thought we have to,
Okay,
yeah,
you're the boss.
thanks. Thanks.
You're so welcome, honey.
I know.
Mhm.
That's what it looks like, Ashton Hall. There she is.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
So,
Is this a long book? So we'll know how much time
this
we need
is
to
a
read?
long book. It's going very fast for me. Now you're really making me look it up. I'm reading it on my phone, so I don't know.
Oh my God, on your phone?
Is she going to be in person or is it going to be on Zoom?
It's going to be Zoom.
Okay.
It's going to be on Zoom. Because I don't even know.
I
what
don't
to do.
recall it as being a particularly short book, but
Right.
not like
It's unknown.
it's not a Gone with the Wind kind of deal.
No.
It's
So here
just
it
over
is.
400 pages.
Yeah.
So a little
Okay.
bit longer,
Okay.
but
But not
terrible.
it doesn't drag. Doesn't drag.
No, it
It's just
really
that I have
keeps
trouble
you-
getting books from my library. I have to call like immediately and then I still have to wait. So I might call
Okay.
tonight because the library's open till 9.
Yeah, call, go, Marilyn, go.
Yeah, absolutely.
It
Yeah, I
is
just put
only
mine
$5.
on reserve.
It's $5 on Kindle.
There you go.
Oh,
And what if you have a Nook?
I get it.
I have a Nook. I don't have a Kindle.
I don't know. I only deal in Kindle, but
I know.
good luck with that.
Same.
I read
I've had this
everything. in
Nook
Kindle.
since 2010 when I went to Israel with
Oh.
my Lindner family, and that's
All right.
the Nook.
All right. It's great seeing
Okay.
everyone. Happy New
Thank you.
Year.
Yeah.
New Year.
Happy,
Healthy.
healthy Year, everyone.
Healthy New
Okay.
Year, everybody.
Healthy, happy.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye all.
Vanessa.
Oh, my pleasure.